okay, I'll give a talk. The title of today's talk is, I think it's relationship chemistry, was that it? And the idea there, the title brings me to the extremely complicated nature of the relationship between, well, first of all, with people, how complicated that can be. In that you can meet someone that you really like, that you think is a wonderful person, that is this or that, and has this kind of qualities. Someone else can meet that person and think that they're very, very difficult, hard to be around, see things in them that you don't see, things like that. And we all experience this in our lives with people that we're really magnetized by, and people that we are the opposite, repelled. We don't want to be around with that person. So there was a recent post, I think it was Jay, posted something about asking people about being around certain people that makes it just really difficult. You can't kind of put your finger on it or put words to it. There's something about that you might feel threatened. And I would, that way I would like to address that is several ways. And the way I'll start out to do that is use my own experience. I meet, because of this dynamic of being a teacher and having a student, I meet a lot of people who are endeavoring to get help with their mind, help with working with their desire to be happy, their desire to be sane, their desire to be reasonable, and everyone has incredibly different, complicated chemistry. And this is why I and other teachers are inviting and encouraging people to go in and find out deeply. Don't just ride on a default kind of thing about who you are and what's going on. If you do that, you'll get all your information out here from the world and in the form of your own projections about it. You won't actually see what's there. You'll project onto it based on hopes, fears, the three poisons, and all the complicated things we call karma, which are I think the example I used recently is you look at the mouth of the Amazon and you think, where did this come from? Well, if you follow back up the Amazon, you're going to find there are countless numbers of tributaries that start way off, and they start very tiny and they work their way up and they collect rain. The example only goes so far, but it is like that. We think of ourselves as a solid, separate being, but we're not. There's so many complicated things going back to beginningless time that you're showing up here in this apparent present moment as me, my experience, this moment, this altar, these people, this computer screen. Very simple. So we tend to gravitate or be drawn to a kind of fixation called right now. But right now is different for different people. Some people's present moment is filled with anxiety, is filled with has no apparent cause, is filled with idealism, with an uplifted quality about everything, or maybe someone's depressed. There's just so many variables, and so it's challenging. And I have a lot to say about this, and I also would like questions about this particular topic. But a few things. I'm going to go in a couple different directions to show. I'm not recommending anybody do anything along this line, but it's something that has been helpful to me as a Dharma teacher. Sometimes since I studied astrology very extensively, sometimes I use astrological configurations about when a person was born, the timing in which they were born. That has helped me to see my own dynamic, my relationship, and what is the qualities of that. Like I said, it's very complicated. Some people are totally devoted to astrology and try to do everything with astrology, including change the oil in their car. It's not going to work. It's a tool. Meditation is also a tool. I've also studied, to share a little bit more, I've also studied handwriting analysis extensively. So I rarely, if ever, talk about it, but I don't miss seeing someone's writing like I'm watching Unyo's writing. And the thing that I've learned to do with this is not to analyze it. Information, if you analyze and work with information on the level that it appears as information, then you're limited to that. But if you look at it and just let it be what it is, and if something surfaces, then it surfaces. If it goes away, don't chase it down. And of course, there's all kinds of psychology out there. There's so many different ways. The Enneagram is another way. It's very interesting. The Enneagram has a lot of aspects to it, if you've studied that are pretty accurate. It's pretty interesting the way that works. And it's because things are dependently arisen, that they show up that way. You can track this with different mechanisms. The I Ching also is another amazing, ancient, goes back, 10,000 years, something like that. I'm not a scholar, so please don't bother to correct me if I'm wrong. Or correct me, that's all right. So there's so many ways that you can do this. Even the tarot cards are another astonishing kind of way of reading that is it's not a separate thing. What the tarot card does and what astrology does and what a handwriting does and what depth psychology, psychoanalysis, working with buried ego states of people that psychologists and therapists sometimes do. All these are different ways and different tools that people could run into that seem to work. I think, and I feel, which is two ways of saying the same thing. That the most important tool I've found is sitting meditation, awareness practice. And I've also done very complicated Tibetan ritualistic, highly ritualized forms, which have their purpose. That's something we could go into in another talk, talking about Tantra. I haven't done every practice. There's hundreds, maybe thousands of them, but I've done a lot of them. Counted lots and lots and lots of mantras, done lots of visualization. And what I have arrived at is the best thing that you can do with all of these things is right here. You have your own mind, you have your body, you have your six sense fields. Observe all the information that you need as a particular living being coming into this manifestation for 50, 60, 100 years, whatever length of time you happen to be here. One of the most important thing you can do is to find out who you are. Find out what we work with identity all the time. We work with chemistry all the time between people. People can make a lot of money just being a relationship counselor, just sitting down and listen to people and making them say, well, it seems like you're saying to her that, and it seems like, and being kind of a moderator. You can and be paid by insurance companies. So, not wrong. It's just something that happens all the time. I'm not even touching on how complicated this is. So of all these discoveries, with the help of my teachers of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Kobun Roshi, His Holiness the 17th, His Holiness the 16th, Karmapa, Mipam Rinpoche. Excuse me. What seems to be important is to actually look at this present moment and see what's happening when you sit down and have all of your senses open and hold very still. The very thing you need to see is going to show up, and it may not be all that comfortable, but you need to see it. Why do I say that? I say, well, I don't know, maybe you don't. Maybe you need to, maybe this lifetime is about something else. Maybe this is about starting a paper container factory. That's what you need to do for the rest of your life. I don't know. But if you're listening to me, if you're listening to this situation, this talk about the chemistry of relationships, I'm saying work with the identity. It's the identity that is the stumbling block. It's the assumption about who you are. And it's just the assumption about who other people are. We're not saying it isn't very complicated and very unique and very separated, but the fundamental understanding is not separate. And that has to be a discovery. If that isn't discovered, then we're back up into relative truth, arguing for position and who should do this and who should do that. And that's a wrong move. This is a good move. That's a bad move. And then working with other people whose chemistry, because of the unresolved emotional dynamic that happens here, created by causes and conditions, created by and stored in the eighth consciousness, according to the Vijnanavada tradition, stored in the eighth consciousness, starts to want a hearing. You interact with somebody else's chemistry, and something happens here. And if you have not explored this, if you don't know who you are, and this is a wordless understanding, if you don't know who you are, then you will reinforce a self against a world, or for a world, or indifferent to a world. Passion, aggression, and ignorance. For a world, passion. Against the world. Against the current political thing, which is it's obvious. This is not something new. All of the reactions and all of the pro or con doesn't matter which direction you go with it. It's all been going on for centuries. It's called civilization. So it is rare to meet someone who has spent the better part of their life or most of their life trying to see who they are, trying to find out, sit down, see who they are, discover this amazing discovery that is without words, without description. We come close to it, we try to say it, not separate. There's some words. But the chemistry between the chemistry that's happening, look at any division anywhere, any kind of warfare, any kind of tension, and you'll see misunderstanding. It's just a misunderstanding. It's an incredible misunderstanding. Everyone wants to be happy, or wants to succeed, and their way of doing it is just extremely complicated. And we add to the complication by going to war. Fighting with, objecting to, protesting. There are people, very, very intelligent people, that talk about we need to protest or something. Chemistry. So unless you find out who this is, then whoever that is out there, any individual, friend, foe, neutral, however you want to look at it, is you're not going to see clearly who's there. You're going to see, if you haven't cleared this one up, you're going to project onto that one who you think that is, and that's who you'll relate to. So you're always looking at your own projections. I like to say, whatever you're looking for, you're looking at. It may be covered up by 3 or 4 layers of silt. But you got to start somewhere, and start by looking at the projection. One of the ways you can do this is to strengthen the seeing part, the witnessing part, the observing part of the discontinuous identity or consciousness. Strengthen that part. How do you do that? Don't do anything. Sit down, hold still, have all the senses open. Just observe what comes and goes, because what comes and goes is the confusion. And it's not something you can figure out or think your way out of. We panic sometimes. We get in a strong emotional, clench or something with ourselves or with someone else or with a situation, and we can feel that. But then we try to work on that with our mental. We try to figure out, how did this happen? One of the things that happens without even giving it a word is blame. We try to figure out, who caused this? Who's at fault here? Knock that off. And when I say that, of course, you can't just stop that, but by saying that, It brings the awareness to the degree to which you do that. It'll help you to see, well, yeah, I guess I am doing that right here. I'm blaming someone. And then we'll have this little mini conversation inside of our mind. It'll be like, but they actually did something. Or they actually are crazy, or working out of this, or working out of that. They have all this anger, or they have all this pride, or they have all this ambition, whatever it may be. So what awareness practice does is it reprioritizes your attention. And you say, well, whose attention is this? And I would say, well, find out. Find out if there is someone who's actually has or is the one who is attentive. Is there an observer? When I say my instruction in meditation is often, and has been for the last probably 10 or 15 years, out of the last 40 plus years of practicing meditation practice and teaching it for a long time, has been hold still, observe what moves. Hold still, observe what moves. And as you do that, you'll see what moves. And then as you do that, you'll start to look at who's observing that. There will be, I'm not going to tell you necessarily to do that, because I don't know I can't see the vast and completely complicated network or matrix of your deeper consciousness. The consciousness that goes very, very deep and has all kinds of tributaries coming up. What is that line from one of the sutras about tributaries? Streams flow in the darkness. They aren't in the darkness if you shine a light on them. And what is a light? Awareness is a light. But if you see something is in the dark, does it remain in the dark? Find out. Train the mind. See what's happening. Question?
Yes. A question from Lisa down in Battle Creek. She's in the Zendo there with others. With so many millions of people in the world, how do we not ignore our relationships to all the ones we don't or can't ever meet?
Very good. Find the relator. Sit down, look at the wall, and find out the part of the polarity that you can actually examine. You can't examine the world. You can't find, it's too complicated. You can't, I mean, I'm not saying you can't in the mundane sense, can't go out and create a great, wonderful movement to help people with vaccinations or something. I mean, sure you can do that, but before you step out into the world, find out who this is, because if you haven't found out who this is, then when you move out into the world, no matter how refined or sophisticated your mental apparatus is, how kind you are, how wonderful you are, how understanding you are, how compassionate you are, how blah, blah, blah. If you have one little tiny skirmish that's happening down here, what I call warfare, that, if you haven't resolved it here, then you will project it out on the world and you resolve it out there. And this is called war. And it may be a tiny one, may not be much. And it needs to be triggered, but it will be triggered by someone else's chemistry. Someone else's spinning in space, spinning in the darkness, will come around and bump into your, Mars square moon. If you study astrology, that's as a whole incredibly complicated area there. Everything's complicated. This is pushing on that, it's pushing on that, and this colors this, and that changes the tone of this. And
question from Sandru in New York.
Sandru.
Is seeing the lack of separation the next insight after drive all blames into one? That is, recognize there's not a one to drive anything into, or maybe it's a next step.
Sandru. Okay. I can go with that. Come and see me, Sandru. That's the next question,
I have one.
please.
How can we tell if we have not examined or if we have examined every small piece that won't lead to warfare?
How can you tell if
Well,
you're all done examining?
Yeah, you say find out who you are. How do you know when you find when
If you'll see that when you see that the fundamental understanding is that you're not separate from anything. There isn't anything that you won't be surprised by anything, no matter how surprising, because it's always just another aspect of yourself. And it's not it's not a kind of a conceptual, I get it. If you tell me I get it, I'll kick you.
So, saying in an objective way as you can muster, there is suffering happening there.
Yes.
You can do that without going to war. Acknowledging that there is, specifically, this is a major situation of
Sure.
terrible suffering.
Yeah. Oh, yes. You can see there's suffering, and it's in your face. If you don't notice it, somebody will
Right.
punch you and say, "Look," like they do all over the media. I mean, you're constantly being shown what everybody thinks about. At the same time, you're seeing this horrible thing here. Somebody else is showing you their flower garden. Not separate. It's an astonishingly poignant situation to be in, to be a human being and being in this world of intense suffering. And compassion is not feeling for. You could say, to use relative terms, it's feeling with. You can't get out of that. You can't escape that. On this path, on the Mahayana Buddhist path, is the path of the Bodhisattva. And it's a heroic path because there's no payoff. It's like the myth of Sisyphus, who pushed the boulder up the mountain and gets to the top and it rolls back down. Except with the Bodhisattva, he doesn't see any difference, or she doesn't see any difference between the top of the hill and the bottom of the hill. So there's just bliss. No matter how much suffering, we're not avoiding the suffering. And bliss isn't opposed to sadness. It's not separate from sadness. Nothing is separated anymore. It's a realization, not an experience. It has experiential overtones to it, and it can be, part of it is experiential, but it is just a complete blowout of everything you've ever thought, everything you've ever believed, everything you've ever used as some kind of a position. It's blown out. And so the chemistry there is so complicated that seeing that it's not separate solves everything. You're no longer at war. You're no longer at peace. You no longer have a positionality, but you won't miss relating to anything. If you haven't done this, haven't found out who this is, then you will be very confused about the world. There'll be good people and bad people, good ideas and bad ideas. Whereas the sage, the bodhisattva, he or she just sees Buddha nature everywhere. And it's not particularly an idealistic kind of fluffy cotton candy, and zebras. Did I say zebras? No, unicorns. Well, zebras. It's not kind of that, it's just everything's so wonderful, everything I see is, no, you might be looking at horrible, horrible situations and resonating with that, and at the same time understanding, your understanding is so thorough about who you are that you can see very clearly who that is. That's why it's sometimes called a mirror. And anything you need to do, you will not be able to stop. You won't be able to resist it. And anything you don't need to do, you will not be magnetized. You can't magnetize something unless it's a solid thing. And the identity of who this is discontinuous in such a way that it appears as separation. As long as there's a body there, then there's some person. But when a realization has occurred, all of that is disappears. Further questions? Yes. You may.
Friends and family seem dependent on your affection for their own well-being, for their own happiness. But there's a lot of different ways that can be shown. So if you don't speak their language of affection and it's affecting their suffering, how can you still connect with them?
How are you doing it now? Just give me an example. Don't need to
my
have a
my mom wants me to hug her, but I'm not a toucher, and so it's
you hug me?
I do.
Why?
Okay, let me give a better example. People people want me to like things on Facebook, and if I don't like their post on Facebook, they think that I don't like them.
How do you know what they think?
Because they tell me, like, why don't you like my thing? And they have this thing on their face, and I can feel their dissatisfaction.
Okay, what's your question?
My question is, how can I still, since their happiness is dependent on my affection, how can I still show my affection in a genuine way? And still support their well-being.
Start hugging your mom.
I actually do. That was a bad example.
Kind of surprised me you didn't hug your mom. Well, that's where you start. I had to teach my mother how to hug. I didn't get any hugs, from her anyway.
Or my dad wants me to call him, but he drives me nuts.
I want you to what?
Call him, but when I talk to him, he drives me nuts.
How does he drive you nuts?
Because he's just, he's nuts.
How is he nuts?
How is he nuts? He is, pretty ignorant and just talks just about everything and consumes a lot of my time, doesn't listen.
Yeah. So one of the things you can do in that area is a dedicated time. So talk to him for 10 minutes and really listen and ask him questions about everything he says. So he says, political stuff. Then say, how does that appear? How did you arrive at that? So actually take an active interest, but do it for a short period of time, so it isn't quite so difficult for you. So and actually genuinely be with him for 5 minutes on the phone. Hey, I called you. I got a few minutes here, and then when it gets to the end of the 5 minutes, you can even time it, or make it 6 minutes, or 8 minutes, or something like that, and say, well, I got to run. Good talking with you. It's always good talking with your dad, even if I had a stepdad that was rather difficult. But I'm just saying, dedicate some time, do that. If you're in front of them, give them some eye contact, and just genuinely be with them, and then split and get out of there. Don't try to overdo it. Don't try to be a saint. Go ahead.
So if that feeling there, because it wouldn't be genuine, I'm forcing myself, but force myself to do it, and then give myself an out though, 5 minutes.
Well, that would be your way of saying it. Forcing yourself to be what?
To listen to him and ask him questions. I don't even want to talk to him in the first place.
Yeah, but you're in the process of sewing a rock suit. You're going to receive a bodhisattva vow, which is to put everyone else before yourself. You sure you want to do that?
Yeah.
Well, then that's a good place to start.
But it seems fundamentally that needs to be a genuine thing.
I wish I could swear right now, but I can't because I'm on YouTube. But heck with that. How's that? Don't worry about being genuine. If you're worried about being genuine, you don't have to worry about being genuine. You're never going to know if you're genuine. That's ego's talk. Now, if I say be genuine, then what I'm doing, or what Trungpa Rinpoche would say when he said that, is so that you can see how you're not genuine. You can see how can I be genuine? You have to start with the way in which you're not genuine. But once you actually are genuine, it may not live up to No, any particular description of genuineness. It's just you're no longer at war with yourself or anything. And not being at war with yourself or anything does not mean that you're not challenged by all kinds of things. In fact, in fiction, it's even worse, because now you don't have any defenses. You've actually given, I'm no longer going to defend myself. My soft, this part is all open. Bring it on. Kill me, take me out. Of course, you have to start somewhere, and I highly recommend you start with your dad. Listen to him. Don't worry about being genuine. Am I your teacher?
Yes, sir.
Do what I said. Let me know how you're doing. I feel really sad about that.
About me not talking to my dad?
No, about your dad. It's just chemistry. It's just the stuff that's been going on. But this is your opportunity to actually stop going to war with it. To actually see the war keep coming at you. Now, he's not deliberately maybe doing anything to, but he's doing something that is feeling very prickly to you and very like, I don't like this. And I'm saying, take it for 5 minutes. Let him, you be the one that he explodes at, so that he can realize that there's no one going to fight with him. No one going to fight, and so that takes a while. And that way you begin, because we aren't separate. That way you begin to affect him, not in a way that you can get a credential for. It's also about you, about training yourself to just be with all things. This is what your vow is. I vow to save all beings. I vow to be with all things. This is the same thing. No longer at war, no longer objecting to anything. Yes.
If in relating to someone, you're maybe experiencing the visual consciousness, the hearing consciousness, the feeling consciousness, and it comes up with all the experiences that you've been conditioned to have at that moment. So how can you, if you're experiencing what is arising in consciousness, all those things together, how can you relate directly to someone?
Just keep doing it. Just repetition. I mean, the very question: how can I do this? Just do it anyway. Keep doing it, and sit a lot. Train the mind. Hold still and watch the way you can't be genuine. Watch the way you keep deceiving yourself, lying to yourself. The way you don't really know what's happening. The way there's some kind of a fight with something, wanting to get something. Some kind of acknowledgement, some kind of a credential. This is what all the stages in the path are about, all the boomies and everything. People look, which boomy are you on? I don't know, I feel like I'm on the fourth boomy, but sometimes I flip back to the third, and then all of a sudden I find myself in the seventh, and I think, look, I guess I am a bodhisattva. Credentials. Don't worry about it. Keep asking me questions. And keep sitting. Sit a lot, yes.
2 more questions and then we have to bow out for
Yeah.
the Daily Dharma Gathering.
Okay.
The first one's from Shane out in California.
Yes. Shane.
How do you meet someone where you think they are instead of where they actually are?
Any ideas and opinions that you have, anything about somebody, would be meeting them where you think they are. If you meet someone where they're at, you won't know who you're looking at. You won't have won't be any preconceptions about them. There will be qualities that'll be there, but they won't translate into some kind of a value. This is a good person, this is a bad, this is a confused person, this is not so confused. If you're unclear about this is why it's necessary to clarify over here. It might happen at the same time. No self, no other. In the Tibetan tradition, this is to see who this is basically the culmination of the Hinayana path, which means actually seeing there's no solid being. There's still somebody out there you got to deal with. There's no solid self. The 5 skandhas, form, feeling, perception, concept, or memory and consciousness, are without the self. That has to be. You have to see this. And that's the way of describing it. They do not amount to a self. watching myself on it. I'm watching which self am I? Too many computers. Yes,
Question from Rasheen in Elk Rapids.
yes, Rashid.
She asks, pleasure and pain seem to control emotions in relationships. What do we do to see the not to of these emotions?
So simply put, I would say just continue to watch them, because we have to watch them and see the way we continue to add little dots of interpretation on them. Something arises in all of its singularity, you could say, and then we pepper it with ideas about it. And then we no longer see it, we just see our ideas about it, and we get the ideas about it confused with the actual situation. So this is why it takes powerful prioritizing of the awareness, and the way it feels to have your awareness prioritized really strongly is if there's ego, if there's self-centeredness lurking around there, it's going to start to panic. So the downside is it's going to start to panic. The upside is it needs to panic, so that you can see that it's, so it can see, so that you can see, so that the awareness can see that it's unreal. So keep looking at that. The very question is showing me, showing us, showing you that this is the area where you're looking, and just keep looking there. It's like looking at something and say, how do I work with that? Well, you've already started. You're starting to see it. So just keep doing that. Keep looking at it. You'll understand as you go along. It's like looking at a path and saying, how do I walk this path? One step at a time.
One last question
Yes.
from Sandra.
Yes, Andrew.
Do I misunderstand the situation if I think anger is yours? It's me reflecting back, isn't it?
Anger doesn't belong to anyone. It's anger boils up out of causes and conditions, and if there's a self involved, then it will either blame someone else, or blame one's imaginary self, or could blame any number of things. But the whole idea of blame is to reduce things to very simple tit for tat. The 8 worldly dharmas of success and failure, praise and blame, even life and death is included in there. Life and death is a misunderstanding.
Should we dedicate the minute?
Yes, thank you. Daily Dharma gathering now?
We'll dedicate the minute first.
Very good.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho san shi shi hu shi san bu sa mo ko sa. Directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita,